The public has no idea because the media hasn't told them what's going on. No one knows that gold was reclassified tier one. No one knows that the central banks have bought any more than any time ever. No one understands this, so they're not prepared. And when it is set free, when the price really takes off, when the manipulation on the Western markets breaks, not only will you see an amazing realization that, oh my gosh, it's higher than I can ever imagine, but ultimately the price setting will move eastward, because I think the COMEX and the LBMA will be looked at like Bernie Madoff, a system that worked just fine until everyone stood for delivery, and then they realized they were being scammed.
Mr. Andy Schectman, thank you so much for coming back on, my friend.
Good to see you, Danny. Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. I enjoy my chats with you, and the audience does as well. So if you guys are enjoying it, Andy's looking to be a regular on the channel. So be sure to subscribe.
I love it. If you'll have me, count me in, man. I love talking to you. I like the way you look at the world. And I think these are the times to have open discussions out there, because our media, Danny, they're not preparing people in any way whatsoever. In fact, all they do these days is create divisiveness, and you can't get out of the way of what you don't see coming. So, yeah, man, I appreciate it. Can't wait to ride shotgun with you for the next several weeks into the election, which I think is going to be anything but dull and complacent, like the Chinese curse says. Man, may you live in interesting times. These are becoming very interesting.
Totally unpredictable. I don't think anyone really has a clue as to what's going to happen between now and November. But yeah, so if you guys are enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode with me and Andy or any of the other guests that we have on the show. So hit that subscribe button. 87% of you guys who watch this channel are still not subscribed. So let's flip that ratio around and yeah, hit that subscribe button, like the video. All right, Andy, let's just go ahead and kick things right off. What should be front and center right now for gold and silver buyers, do you think? Considering everything that's happening around the world, what should be on the radar screen of the gold and silver investor?
Well, there were a few meetings that happened recently in Russia, and I think that's probably where things should be focused on, at least for now, because there are some very big things that came out of it. First and foremost, you had a meeting in Novigrad just a couple of weeks ago, and it coincided with the G7 meeting where the Royal Crown Prince was invited to the meeting, and he turned it down. He said he had other things he needed to do. So he turns down a meeting to the G7. And now this is just a few days after they did not re-sign the exclusivity deal with the United States, the Petro deal, where now in essence they will openly sell oil in other currencies. But they turned down the meeting to the G7 and sent their finance ministers to the meeting in Russia. And this is a very big deal, because what came out of these meetings is anything but trivial. You had how many people? 21,000 people that showed up at these meetings, first and foremost. Wow. And $80 billion worth of bilateral agreements were struck on the sidelines at these meetings. And these are deals that used to settle in dollars that are no longer settled in dollars. So you have 139 countries represented at these meetings. $80 billion in bilateral deals that are settled in local currencies. 59 nations, we are told after this meeting, plan to join BRICS. You're dealing with a massive growing chorus of countries that are finding safety in numbers. They talked a lot about the new settlement currency, which won't be a unified currency, but they basically called it the unit. And they've given it a name, and it was spoken publicly about by the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, who had 2 meetings with Putin. And, for 3 years now, I've been talking about the comments made over and over and over again by Sergei Glaziev, the Russian finance minister and the minister of economic development for the Eurasian Economic Union, another entity that will join the BRICS 100%. In fact, there was recently a call by the president of Belarus to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union into the BRICS. I've been saying that for 3 years. They're all the same countries, and they will join. But Glaziev is the architect of all of this. And originally, he talked about a basket of currencies and a basket of commodities. Now, it became very obvious to me since the very beginning when he said that gold would be central to this basket because the BIS reclassified it as the world's only other tier one asset, the BIS being the Bank of International Settlements, the most influential bank in the world, the central bank, or central bank as it's called. They said, yeah, gold is the only other tier one asset. And when you look at the massive acquisition by the central banks, which is reaching record over record over record, but maybe even more telling than that is the repatriation. You look at a country like India, who bought more gold in the first 4 months of this year, 1.5 times the amount of gold they bought all of last year. But they just repatriated 100 metric tons from the Bank of England. You see, all of these banks would leave their gold both at the New York Fed, which is in essence a proxy for the COMEX, and the Bank of England, which is a proxy for the London Bullion Metals Association. So it would be safely held in these central bank holdings and the ability to transact on the world's primary exchanges, which are losing legitimacy. And I think losing legitimacy fast. And, we're seeing delivery upon delivery upon delivery coming off the exchanges, where here again, another 3 million ounces were delivered in gold off the COMEX for the June contract, following massive deliveries, 500 million worth that we saw 3 weeks ago. All of them, most of them looks like they're heading eastward towards China. And, a lot of people don't know the CME, which is the COMEX, created a contract in 2015 that allows gold to be delivered to Brinks Hong Kong. They created a contract that does this. So the Brinks Hong Kong vault is COMEX. So these bars get delivered to Brinks Hong Kong and then trucked to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And 4 Fridays ago, they were kilo bars, $500 million worth. And these kilo bars are the mini contracts. They're not the big COMEX bars, but that's exactly what the Shanghai Gold Exchange trades in. So we're seeing gold not only accumulated by the central banks and the sovereign wealth funds, but repatriated and delivered off the exchanges, removing counterparty risk. But anyways, going back to the unit, they said, and they publicly said this, they being the head of the BRICS New Development Bank and Putin and Glaziev, that it's been decided that this new settlement currency, using the project M-Bridge, we'll talk about that in a moment, will be a basket of 60% local currencies of the BRICS nations, 40% gold. And it's been decided. And this is a massive deal, huge deal. Project M-Bridge, which we were just told at the beginning of June that Saudi Arabia became a full participant in, is a cross-border payment system using digital currencies of all of these nations. And it sidesteps the SWIFT system, that vehicle that allows these countries to be sanctioned. And it's no coincidence that the first 2 trades that we saw in 2023, the test trades, the pilot trades, were for gold and oil. China trading digital yuan with the United Arab Emirates, cross-border, settling with these countries in yuan, and they can send those yuan right back to the Shanghai Gold Exchange for immediate delivery in gold bars. And in fact, the combined volume, by the way, over the last 75 days in the Shanghai Gold Exchange and the Shanghai Futures Exchange, it's up over 200% and has now surpassed the volume on COMEX. It's now the number 2 most relevant gold trading hub on the planet. And this is not to be taken lightly. So basically what they came out and said was that these countries, every one of the countries, will be able to use their own central bank digital currency and settle with other countries, trade with one another in their local currencies. But the settlement part of it can then be done in the new BRICS settlement currency, which they called for a meeting in September in Shanghai. Or I think it was Shanghai, it's in China somewhere, where they're going to discuss the new unit. And in essence, that sets the table for it to be introduced and brought out in the big meeting in October. But they have told us, you have the finance minister of Russia, you have Putin, and you have the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, which is a big deal. She said, we love it. It's 40% gold, 60% currency from the BRICS countries. So when you see all of the countries that are repatriating their gold, where India buys 1.5 times the amount they did all of last year and brought back 100 tons, where just a month ago, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and about 7 African countries repatriated all their gold from the New York Fed. That's COMEX. And remember in 2017, the Bundesbank from Germany, Hungary, Turkey, Poland, Austria, the Dutch National Bank, the Czech National Bank, they all repatriated their gold from the New York Fed and the Bank of England. There's been a massive buying spree and a massive repatriation spree. And so what we are seeing is the framework out of this meeting where 21,000 people attended in 139 nations and 80 billion in bilateral deals were signed. 59 nations have pledged to join the BRICS. This is just the very beginning. But when you realize that they are now going to allow these countries to maintain, autonomy, have their own central bank digital currency, trade with one another in their central bank digital currencies, and then settle in the BRICS settlement currency, which will be gold and a basket of other currencies in the BRICS, the framework is there. And so this de-incentivizes all of the Southern Hemisphere to continue holding treasuries. It incentivizes them to hold gold and to accumulate and to repatriate. And that's exactly what we are seeing. So it's a very big deal, man. And when you see Saudi Arabia become a full participant in Enbridge, this is a very big deal. It's a program that was designed by the United Arab Emirates, who just joined BRICS, along with Saudi Arabia, China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. These countries they all realize that trading on the SWIFT and trading in dollars and treasuries, putting reserves in treasuries, is foolish. And we've proven that by not only sanctioning Russian assets, but confiscating them and using them to buy weapons from the military-industrial complex and send them to the Ukraine to fight the country we stole them from. This is a problem. So this acceleration, it's happening and it's real.
What you just said goes hand in glove with the de-dollarization process, because, once we crossed that red line of seizing Russia's assets, the United States no longer became a nation ruled by law. It became a nation ruled by men, right? So all of a sudden you have all of these countries, BRICS had been fairly dormant for a good number of years. They came into prominence, sometime in the early 2010s. And then you really didn't hear much from them up until about a couple of years ago, coinciding with the start of the Ukraine war. That's when you started seeing BRICS kind of, picking steam back up again. So to me, it seems like it's these countries that are just looking around and saying, hold on a second, they could do the same thing that they did with Russia with us. So we better get our act together and we better figure out a way to, get around it. Is that what you would agree with as well?
Exactly what it is. It's foolish to hold treasuries when we are looked at as completely and totally hypocritical, where you can have Janet Yellen say to CNBC that, if Putin gives, or if Xi gives 1 penny to Russia, mind you, we don't care if they're friends, but if he gives 1 penny to them for their war efforts, we will sanction their companies, their banks in Beijing themselves. We've given 260 billion to the Ukraine, including missiles and F-16s and intelligence and all of these things. But it doesn't matter what we do because we're the world reserve currency. This is growing very thin, I think. And the rest of the world understands that not only are we broke, we're insolvent, we're wayward in terms of what's happening in this country, but we're going around the world imposing these sanctions and these restrictions. And yet we do worse by their own opinion, by their own view. We're viewed as hypocritical. And this is why you're seeing these countries trade with one another in local currencies, and instead of settling in treasuries, they're settling in commodities like gold and oil, which are being remonetized. This is Zoltan Pozsar world, where he said Bretton Woods 3, where we are now, will be a system that will be all about commodities. And you can see it. The commodity complex is being accumulated by these countries. They own the majority of all of the rare earths, and they produce 100%, China does, of the majority of 100% of the rare earths and the graphite. And so, not only do they produce the most, they refine the most, and they 100% is refined. They're producing 60 to 80% of it and then refining 100%. They bought the London Metals Exchange 4 or 5 years ago, which is the base metals, the commodities like copper, zinc, lead, steel. They're striking deals all around the world in under-industrialized areas. And whether it be the Belt Road or the BRICS, these are countries not only that are very key in shipping routes and in both on land and sea, but also hugely important would be their assets in the ground. And they're helping these countries become industrialized. They're building roads and bridges and maritime channels and all of these things. But this is all about commodities. And I think you're seeing oil and gold be viewed very differently. These commodities are worth more than the currencies that are being used to pay for them. You know, it used to be he who has the gold makes the rules. I would say he who has the commodities in this ecosystem we find ourselves moving into makes the rules, and it's starting to accentuate greatly. And we're seeing huge deliveries off of COMEX. Huge. We just saw 3 million ounces delivered off of COMEX here in the June contract. We saw $500 million worth of gold delivered to China in a contract that was designed in 2015 by the CME Group, which is COMEX, where bars contracts can be purchased in the West and delivered in Brinks, Hong Kong, which is a COMEX facility. And then they're just trucking them right over to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So using the suppression of our markets, they are literally controlling the whole commodity complex. And this slow accumulation is enough to make people look past it. The recency bias, it's brushed aside because you're not seeing something immediate. Like to your point, this has been 17, 18 years in the works. But it does seem that they're accelerating their drive now as we get closer to the election, and things seem to be accelerating quite a bit all around us. So yeah, I think that what has enabled them to accumulate what they have to build this infrastructure without anyone noticing is just that they're methodical and they realize they only get one shot at this. So you can see it. But when you have 59 countries come out of the meeting 2 weeks ago saying we're joining the BRICS, now you're talking literally the overmajority of human population, GDP, military might, 3 of the 4 largest nuclear arsenals, the majority of the rare earths, the majority of the precious metals, the this is something that you cannot take lightly. And when you talk about 100% of all the refining of these rare earths, let alone the majority produced, pulled out of the ground, we haven't thought this green thing out too well. When they finally get to that point where there's collective realization in the West that this is real, it's too late. So yeah, I think that this is something people need to pay close attention to, and it's just starting to gain steam.
Yeah, you mentioned the 17, 18-year time frame. When you look at the pound sterling, for example, that to lose its reserve status took a couple of decades, if not 2 or 3 decades. So to see what's happening now, the dominoes were already falling 10 plus years ago. And this is a long process. This is not something that happens at the flip of a switch or overnight or because of one singular event, but rather a cascading of events. So when I hear from these, dollar bulls who like to cite, oh, well, yeah, we might see de-dollarization, but it's going to take a lot longer than most people think. But it seems like things are happening now at such a rapid pace. It's like every time I have you on, Andy, it's just like one new thing to add to the stack. Like, what is your take? Do you think how far into the tooth do you think we are in this de-dollarization process? Are we still in the early innings, later innings? What do you think?
I mean, you can see, I call it logarithmic decay, little by little by little, then all at once. And you're right, it's not going to happen overnight until it does happen overnight. And the thing that most people are missing is, what's happening in terms of, if you look right now, gold as an example, just became the second largest holding in central bank stashes, replacing the euro for the first time ever. And that's the little by little. You can see that the amount of dollars held in the central bank's coffers has fallen. It still represents, I don't know, 60+%, but it was at 75%, a decade ago. It is moving in that direction. And it's one of these deals where I think it's happening in a manner that you can see it's really beginning to gain steam and momentum, but it doesn't suit these countries at all to flip the switch until they're ready, until they have built this massive infrastructure. If you had 59 countries all in the BRICS and a common settlement currency, the unit, which we've been told, and trade is moving, and their military coordination is there, and all of the trade and sea routes are there, and they'll flip the switch. This is something that I think is being done very methodically. So yes, it won't happen all at once, but it is happening. And you can see it is indeed happening. I mean, ask yourself this question: who the hell wants to hold our treasuries? Who wants to hold treasuries that, can be confiscated, can be inflated away, can be defaulted upon? And in a country that's creating $1 trillion in debt every 100 days, Danny, and we're at almost 200 trillion in debt. 150 of it is unfunded: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government, military pensions. We have a spending addiction that's out of control, and a government that has chosen to weaponize the treasury market. So in every way, I think it is indeed happening, and you're seeing all of these countries strike deals in local currencies and not in the dollar. So all of these deals, 80 billion done on the sidelines at this last Russian meeting, or now Saudi Arabia now selling oil in other currencies, or Saudi Arabia buying corn and soybeans from Brazil, paying for it in digital yuan, or Russia and India doing deals in rupee and ruble. All of these deals are chipping away at the settlement status of the dollar. And the fact that these countries are selling treasuries and buying commodities to replace it chips away at the reserve status of the dollar. So little by little, by little, by little, by little, then bang, all at once. I don't know when that all at once is, but we're closer to it than we've ever been. And when you see Saudi Arabia turn down an invitation to the G7 meeting, and then send their finance minister to the meeting in Russia, when you see Saudi Arabia become a full-fledged member of Project Enbridge, which is the vehicle to sidestep SWIFT, when you see them not re-up their petro deal, we're getting closer than we've ever been. That is the de-dollarization process. And it's one of these deals where it has to be done the right way. You can't move too fast, or you cut off your nose to spite your face in every way. So it's happening. Don't know when it is, but I think that, excuse me, the little by little allows people to be naysayers and dismiss it because nothing's happening. Yet if you pay close attention over the last 3 or 4 years, the amount of developments have been extraordinary, and they are increasing in magnitude and in speed. So our media doesn't do a bad job. They do no job of telling people what's happening. So when that all at once happens, when there's a realization collectively by the majority of the countries around the world that the dollar is no longer a preferred vehicle for reserves, the Treasury especially, but for settlement even, that there are other alternatives, and you go from a slow drip of detreasurization and de-dollarization into a faster and faster and faster and faster, and then a boom. I think that's when it happens. There's a theory out there called Project Sandman. And Mike Adams the health ranger, talks about a lot, where he says there's 150 or 60 countries who have agreed to do that all at once at some point, dump treasuries, dump dollars, but not until they have their ducks in a row. Don't know when that is, but wow. I guess I would simply say that if you are not a contrarian right now, you're bound to be a victim. And I don't know when that is, but I think if you are fully invested in dollars, ultimately you're destined to go broke when this thing breaks. In any country that is adding and increasing debt at the speed that we are, where you're adding trillions of dollars every 100 days, if not faster, this is unsustainable. And ask yourself, why would anyone want to hold our currencies and our treasuries in exchange for precious commodities? And I think the answer becomes they wouldn't. And at what point is there just this collective switch? I'd say it's sooner than most people would think, and a lot slower than most of us who have been following this think, but a lot faster than the majority of the mainstream would ever give credibility to.
Look, I mean, we've been in the fastest rate hiking cycle in history the last two to 3 years. But despite all of that, the price of gold made new all-time highs. The price of silver made decade-long highs. What is that telling you, essentially? When you raise rates at record pace and you still see a record gold price, what does that mean?
Well, that means that these relationships of interest rates or a strong dollar mean nothing to the central banks. The central banks don't care about any of that. They just want the gold. And so, the theory is if you have much higher interest rates, there is an opportunity cost for holding something that doesn't yield any interest. People don't realize that gold's appreciated by 9.9% per year since 2000. It's outpaced everything, maybe with the exception of Bitcoin. And it's accelerating now because the central banks are accumulating it and they don't care. You see it, it's the positive real yield and the strong dollar, and gold's still moving up. That's very, very bullish. I think that's these relationships mean nothing to the central banks. And I think that's really the most important thing to keep in mind is that you have flows of metal at record levels leaving the exchanges, repatriation. We talked about India, who bought 1.5 times the amount of gold all of last year. They bought it in the first 4 months of this year, and they repatriated 100 metric tons from the Bank of India. They now, in essence, hold all of their gold. The bank from the Bank of England. The Bank of England is by proxy the LBMA. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we talked, probably when I was on your show last, we saw Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Senegal, Cameroon, Algeria, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia bring all of their gold back from the COMEX or from the New York Fed, which is in essence the COMEX. And you're seeing these central banks, they don't care about a positive real yield. And let's just call it what it is. This positive real yield is fugazi. I mean, yeah, so that's if we believe inflation's 3.5% and you're getting 5% in a short-term treasury. But we know that the inflation numbers are a lie. We know that inflation is much higher than that. But even still, if we take it at face value, when you have a positive real return in short-term treasuries, it should be the death knell for gold, and a very strong dollar where it should be the inverse of gold. And I think that's incredibly bullish. And it just shows how much these central banks want to accumulate gold. They're the ones I think that are keeping the price elevated as they continue to accumulate it, because the unit, as we know, is 40% gold, which is the only other tier one asset in the world. So the central banks know the playbook. And that's what I would take away from it, is that, if this positive yield on 10-year treasury or on the short-term treasuries was so enticing, then why are all of these countries selling treasuries and buying gold? And I think that's really what I would take away, is that in the end, they just want the gold and they don't care about any of these other relationships.
Well, hey, you may or may not have seen this survey, but the World Gold Council came out with a survey on central banks. And so they asked them to rank what factors influence their decision in gold buying. And the number one reason was no default risk. No surprise, right? Number
Right.
two reason, performance during times of crisis, a crisis hedge. And then the number three reason, it's its historical relevancy, gold's historical relevancy as a store of value. And then you've got the long-term store of value, that's number four, highly liquid asset, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, exactly what you said. All these things don't describe U.S. debt. These are the antithesis of U.S. debt, right? So you see all these central banks loading up, and they've been loading up for what, 13 years? Like if you chart a graph of their holdings, it goes all the way back there. So how does what are some of the biggest risks out there for I know I'm calling it a risk, but when the gold price shoots up, there's usually something afoot that's wrong in the world, right? It's a hedge against crisis. So what are some of the biggest risks out there for a spike in gold, do you think?
Massive debt. But I mean, to me, the debt is kind of the sideshow. Yeah, the debt, it would be a reason for people. At some point, the debt has to matter, right? And interest rates that have been suppressed forever, that have created distortions in asset prices, all these things have to matter. We once had a very thriving economy. I think it's been brought to its knees by things like political corruption, manipulation of the news, inflation, the printing of money that gives the illusion of a thriving economy when you see just a handful of stocks pushing the whole indice up. And you realize that the Russell 2000, as an example, which is a much broader indication of the economy, most of it's underwater. if you spent $100 every second of every day, it would take you almost 2,000 years to equal just the 6.2 trillion we've spent in the last 12 months. This is the kind of, I don't know, excess spending, and you mix into it the meddling in affairs of other nations that I think accelerate the decline of the dollar. Um, you're seeing countries like China unload $53 billion in treasuries a month ago. You're seeing what's happening all around this country politically, socially, morally, all of these things, they all have significance. But to me, none of it all pales in comparison to the betrayal of trust. Um, as Putin described where we are right now at this meeting recently that he had in Novograd, he came out and said that the Bretton Woods system is dead and that the dollar is backed by nothing other than trust. And when you talk about trust, a country that has really betrayed it by weaponizing the dollar, stealing it in essence, taking the reserves of the Russian government and using the proceeds to buy weapons to give to the country Russia's fighting a war against. That's a line you can never come back from. And the world looks at us as being very hypocritical. We've talked about that forever, where we can give 260 billion to the Ukraine with no congressional oversight. But if anyone else gives any money to Russia to fight the Ukraine, well, they get sanctioned and threatened. And we're a country that has no fiscal responsibility or monetary responsibility, where a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago, and we're creating $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. We are impoverishing our children and our grandchildren. There will be a consequence for all of this. But I guess to me, it is the hypocrisy and the weaponization that is far greater than the mismanagement of the reserve currency. And what really makes it, I think, worse, which accelerates the de-dollarization and the de-treasurization, is the moral fabric decaying in this country, because the United States used to stand for so much, and it seems that it doesn't at this moment. And at least that's the image that we are portraying to the world. So I think if you're not a contrarian right now, Danny, you're damn well bound to be a victim. And I don't look at gold as an investment. To me, it's wealth. And not only is it the only other tier one asset in the world as reclassified by the most influential bank on the planet, the central bank, the BIS, but it's being accumulated by the central banks at levels the world has never seen. And in terms of international reserves, it's up to almost 18%, which is the most in almost 30 years. And it's the second largest asset now held in central bank reserves, surpassing the euro for the first time ever. So it's slowly gaining traction, but only with the central banks, right? So the people in the West are asleep as the central banks are literally accumulating everything that's not nailed down using the Western paper price, the suppression of it, the massive leverage of the Western markets to drain the exchanges, delivery cycle after delivery cycle when no one's paying attention. And you see, everyone's invested in NVIDIA and Apple and Bitcoin. At the same time, they're missing out on what is a shift of, I think, a shift of what is considered money. I think gold, it has been remonetized in most of the world. It is now replacing the treasury because it can't be confiscated, because it can't be defaulted. Just all of those answers that you gave, in essence, what the question should have really said is, do you feel that gold, in essence, replaces the treasury market? The treasury market, if you look at the 10-year treasury, gold has doubled its performance for the last 25 years, doubled. And it has no counterparty liability. It has that historical significance. It can't be inflated away or defaulted upon. It is now the second largest asset in central bank holdings. It is the only other tier one asset in the world. And I think when you realize and look at it that way, a country that should be clinging and nurturing its world reserve status as a privilege we've done everything we can to shed it and lose it. So it's not even as much gold as it is the dollar. And unless you think the dollar will spike in value for some reason, then holding gold right now has never been more important, and probably carrying the least amount of downside risk, even though we're at or near all-time highs, because I think the dollar, in essence, is getting close to, the ninth inning, or maybe the end of the ninth inning in terms of its run. And gold is just being, I think, um, people these central banks are recognizing gold once again for what it truly is and what it has always been, and that is, wealth. So yeah, I don't think that people really need to worry about gold falling to the downside, unless you think there's a miraculous rebound in global strength and trust in the dollar and in the U.S. Treasury market.
Look, the signs are all around us. The Ukraine just attacked Crimean beach the other day with ATACMS. You had, speaking of Putin and meetings, he just had a big meeting in North Korea the other week. It turns out that the South Koreans were arming the Ukrainians. And probably because of that, you had this big meeting in North Korea where you probably have never seen as many Russian flags as you would have in that meeting alone. So the battle lines have been drawn. You also have this new bill in the House that aims to automatically enlist 18 to 26-year-olds. So, I mean,
That's unbelievable.
That is
it really is unbelievable when you see that. And, you talk about military in this country and enlisting all of these kids. I don't know. I think that's
and it may not stop
have,
with them. I mean, look at who they're enlisting in Ukraine. They're enlisting 60-year-old men.
yeah,
So
well,
if they're going to need the recruits, they're going to pull up from any age bracket they need.
our military is now at its smallest size since 1940. And, when you talk about trying to get people in, evidently they've abandoned their fitness standards for joining. And, they're even offering many of these illegal immigrants in exchange for joining the military U.S. citizenship. And I think, it says 77% of young people in America do not meet the basic standards to join the military, whether physical, mental, or moral reasons. And you look at what's happening, in college campuses. If kids are even can afford going to college, you end up with all these kids that are filled with hatred for the country. And so much so, you get the supreme leader of Iran saying that to the American students, you are currently part of the resistance front and waged an honorable battle despite the relentless pressure of your government. And then you look at, people, patriotic Americans who have been in the military that are now they're extremists, right? And which is disgusting. And so if you realize that a strong nation needs both a strong economy and a strong military, we have the Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, said that by 2031, 100% of tax revenue will go just to pay the interest on the debt and mandatory entitlement spending. Well, military is discretional. So in 6 years, and that doesn't include the millions and millions and millions of people who are entered this country, who's going to pay for them? The Congressional Budget Office will be way off on this. So 5 years or less, 100% of all military spending will have to be borrowed or printed by the Fed, leading to monetization of assets. So you have a country that is not military ready. You have much of their weaponry is old and antiquated. You have the lowest number of recruits since 1940. Much of the public is apathetic, doesn't want to join, or is out of shape. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I can understand. They probably feel they have to do this, but this is just another part of the big problem. And it's scary when you see them. And now they're talking actually to Danny about bringing women into the fold.
Exactly.
I saw by
I was going to bring that up. I mean, that's a signpost of a degrading morality, because women are it's the gender that brings life into this world. So when you're enlisting women into the military, that tells you that you have no concern about the next generation.
None. Yeah, it's crazy. It really is. And I mean, it's almost like we're living in bizarro world, man. It truly is. It's hard to even contemplate where we are when you've seen so many things happen and change in the last several years, and now to bring the draft into the equation, um, crazy.
Yeah, I mean, again, the signs are all there. You just gotta have eyes to see. B of A, Bank of America, recently said gold could rally to $3,000 in the next 12 to 18 months. Seeing how things are turning out, I mean, that doesn't seem too far-fetched. What do you think of that projection there from B of A?
I think it's low, but I think that it should definitely be at least that. They've been saying that now for over a year. I think that it should be. Um, Look, the amount of rehypothecation and leverage that we see on these exchanges is playing right into the hands of the rest of the world. And 30,000 contracts stood for delivery in the June delivery month, 100-ounce contracts, and which is a lot. And but this is what we continue to see. And um, it's interesting if you look at every central bank balance sheet, gold is held in an account called the gold revaluation account. I think there is a realization by much of the elite that the central banks that gold is money and that dollars and treasuries are on their way out, that we need to have trust in a system that's lost it. And the only way that you'll ever get gold backing a system is to have the prices much higher than they are right now. So 3,000 to me is low to where it will ultimately be. Um, so yeah, I think that's quite realistic. And at $3,000 gold, where do you have silver? If you realize that silver and gold have had a 42 to 1 average price relationship for the last 100 years, even though it's coming out of the ground at 7 to 1, 3,000 divided by 42 is $71. That if we had $3,000 gold, the average price relationship between silver and gold of the last 40 plus 100 plus years would be $71. And if you took 3,000 divided by 7, $428. Is that crazy? I don't know. You tell me. That's what it's coming out of the ground at. Even at 2350 divided by 7, you end up with 335. So I think metals will go higher than people think possible. It is because it is distorted by a handful of commercial banks that have these massive concentrated short positions. Where on the London Metals Exchange, you have 20 million ounces of gold trading every day, but they tell us those numbers are 10 times understated. So 200 million ounces of gold traded every day, and which would be 2.9 billion ounces of silver every day. That's 3.5 times global mine supply. These Western exchanges, which were built to, in essence, keep the price of gold and silver in check, which would allow the world to believe that the Western bond markets and the Western currencies were indeed stable, strong, and secure, because the canary in the mine shaft would be gold and silver. The constant rehypothecation and naked shorting, this leverage to the downside, has enabled the West to control the prices. But the countries that are standing for delivery were never sophisticated or coordinated enough or wealthy enough to do this. And now they are. And this is how they win: by draining the exchanges, using this fugazi price where these countries, or these banks rather, can naked short tremendous amounts of contracts with nothing behind it but the ability to print more money and short more. But that doesn't dissuade, like you were saying earlier, with the positive real yield. These countries don't care about any of it. They just want the physical asset. And so I think it's very dangerous to be naked short right now. And ultimately, prices go higher than people think possible. And that's another thing, is that, the public has no idea because the media hasn't told them what's going on. No one knows that gold was reclassified tier 1. No one knows that the central banks have bought any more than any time ever. No one understands this. So they're not prepared. And when it is set free, when the price really takes off, when the manipulation on the Western markets breaks, not only will you see an amazing realization that, oh my gosh, it's higher than I can ever imagine, but ultimately the price setting will move eastward, because I think the COMEX and the LBMA will be looked at like Bernie Madoff, a system that worked just fine until everyone stood for delivery, and then they realized they were being scammed. So to have an exchange like the Shanghai Gold Exchange, where volume has increased to over 200% in the last 75 days, making it the second most vibrant or the second most volume of any commodity exchange for gold on the planet, surpassing the COMEX. And now gold is the second largest asset in the central bank holdings. Little by little, it's happening. People aren't noticing it. So when it goes like that, they'll be like, oh my God, what just happened? But guys like you and I and your followers will be like, well, it's taken so long. Why? And that's because they're methodical in the way they do it, the accumulation by the world's central banks, and it's being fought by the West using suppression and over leverage that will ultimately end up very badly for them. So closer than we've ever been and higher than people can imagine would be my take on where it goes and when.
I mean, people are willing to kill each other for a $50 discount on a toaster oven at Black Friday. I mean, just imagine when gold begins to skyrocket and then all of a sudden you have all this retail demand for it. I don't
See, that's the thing people don't get, that a few $1 billion would empty out the Western stockpiles overnight.
Mhm.
And most of what we get, if you take the US and the Canadian mints out of the equation, is across the globe. Australia, Austria, South Africa, United Kingdom. So you have some refineries and two mints in the West. And when they run out of product, it's over. And so, yeah, I think there will come that realization. And if you realize, as Rick Rule says, that the allocation from Joe and Jane Sixpack to the Harvard Endowment Fund is 0.5%.
Right.
At 5% allocation, it's a tenfold increase in demand. And this market does not have the ability to accommodate that. And it's happened over and over and over again throughout the years when there wasn't the demand that we have now at all. And the mints just run out of product usually in late October, early November, and they stop until the next year, until January of the following. You got this window of November, December, the holidays, where there's very little product available. They're not making the next year, and they've run out of the current year. But that's a window into how fast it dries up. And that's all it takes. There are 5, 6 major mints. When they run out of product, it's game over. And this is why, Danny, they say there is no bull market like a metals market, because it speaks to your concern. And the higher the price goes, or the crazier the world only strengthens your grip and your resolve, and reinforces the motivation that you employed to own it in the first place, that things are scary. So yeah, I think that ultimately the market will be identified by people who haven't been following as, geez, it's kind of like the way they look at Bitcoin. It's gotten so expensive. Can I really buy it? But the other people inside who've been watching will understand that getting physical product in any timely fashion and something that you want will be very difficult, regardless of the price, because there's just not enough out there. There's been so much money creation. There's so much money out there, just a very little bit of it. 1 month's worth of debt, or 2 weeks worth of debt in this country, 500 million. I mean, you're talking 500 billion. There's nothing left on the planet. So yeah, it's I don't know how 8,300 times, I don't know how many ounces it would be and what it's worth, but I don't even think the entire United States gold stockpile is $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So, you're talking, they're printing that, they're running into that much debt every 100 days. There's so much money and so little of gold and silver out there that ultimately it will define the marketplace. If I had to guess, the inability to secure it, to source it, and no one's going to sell it.
I think a lot of an action can be pinned on false hope. Even if you have a glimmer of hope, like a 1% glimmer of hope, a lot of people put their hope in the next election, right? It's coming up. Maybe if we get Trump in, things will get better and we can kind of narrowly escape. But because you have that small glimmer of hope, that's what's stopping you from actually taking action and prepping monetarily, food, et cetera, et cetera. But do you think that regardless of the outcome of the election, let's say we do get Trump in, they let him win, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything substantial that could change in your eyes, or at least on the financial side and the geopolitical side?
I'd like to hope so. I think it could slow it down. You wonder if we've gone too far. We've crossed that line. And he talks about doing the same thing. He talks about sanctioning countries that want to move away from the dollar. He talks about devaluing the dollar. Ultimately, they have to devalue the dollar. If they don't devalue the dollar, paying this incredible mountain of debt becomes next to impossible. That's why Richard Russell 20 years ago was saying the Fed has two choices: inflate or die. Well, inflate is devalue. And so you monetize, you devalue, and he continues with the sanctions. Are we too far? I don't know. I mean, certainly I'll say this: if he doesn't win, this country's done. And we continue down this pathway for another 4 years, we're in big trouble. And I think we are on our way to universal basic income. We're on our way to borderline into socialism, where it is a country that is divided. It is a country that is wayward in every way. It is a country that is spending far more than it produces or consuming more than it produces. And ultimately leads to modern monetary theory, where the Fed has to come in and be the only one dumb enough to keep the engine going through printing and buying treasuries. I don't know how else you do it when you continue to spend the way that we are, produce much less than we consume, and go around the world bullying, sanctioning, and confiscating in what is a morally corrupt administration. So yeah, I mean, if he doesn't win, God help us. If he does, there is reason for hope. I think this country typically does best with its back to the wall, Danny. But the problem is, for the first time in my lifetime, I'm 53. I don't see unity in this country. You're defined by who you voted for. Try to talk, about Trump to someone on the left or vice versa, and it becomes heated. And there isn't unity. There isn't open, objective debate. And if you never listen to the other side, you never grow. You learn more and more about less and less till you know everything about nothing. It seems we're very polarized, and have broken far away from those things that made this country great. For the left to be so about being tolerant of everything and everyone, they certainly don't seem very tolerant in regards to opinion or difference of opinion in terms of political opinion. And so, yeah, I don't know, brother. I would like to hope that there is, but I wonder if the glass has been smashed so badly that, can we put it back together? It's pretty tough to do. So I don't know, but I will say if he doesn't win, God help us. If he does, there's a chance, but ultimately this de-dollarization, this de-treasurization, this move away from this unipolar world, I think is real. And I don't even think he can stop it. Might be able to slow it down, but I don't know that he can stop it.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, any closing thoughts?
I guess all I would say is trust your gut. It's not about the return on your money, it's return of it. And I just think it's important for people to see through the noise. I talk about buying gold and silver, not to become wealthy. It is wealth. And when you see the biggest money in the world, not only continue to accumulate it in favor, accumulating it in lieu of dollars and treasuries, but to me, the biggest thing is repatriation, where all of these countries have very recently started bringing gold home from where they would typically hold it with safety. That speaks of lack of trust. And when you do not trust any longer, you begin to accelerate and building in what is an alternative. When 59 countries come out of this meeting and say we're joining the BRICS, and countries are accumulating and repatriating and bringing gold home, not only off of the exchanges, but off the central banks, both Bank of England and the New York Fed, it's very ominous. And we have the biggest election of our lives just a few months away, not to mention the BRICS meeting. And we were just told that there is a common settlement unit, the unit, 40% gold, 60% BRICS currencies. It's accelerating. So trust your gut and prepare like a hurricane is coming. Literally, food, water, batteries, small bills, fives, tens, 20s, everything, home protection, guns, bullets, whatever it is, and own some gold and silver and minimize your exposure to the dollar. I think it's going to get really, really interesting over the next couple of weeks. And I would prepare as if as if things as if it's not orderly, because I think that's indeed, if you ask yourself, do you really think that it will be smooth sailing between now and the end of the year, then sit back and watch idly. If not, then you're getting late in the game, and start to prepare and get your house in order as if a hurricane is coming down upon us. And I think one is financially for sure. But how does that play out in the greater scheme? I'm not quite sure, but I do think that it is something people need to get ready for, because what will come with all of this will be a massive contraction in credit. The banks will reel in, and just as bullish and amazing as it was to have easy credit and lots of money, the contraction of credit in this environment, the reining in, I think will be disastrous. And this is when the banks fail, the commercial real estate fails. The byproduct of that is not pretty. So yeah, I think people need to prepare. But look, we're going to do this. We're going to do this every week or two leading up to the election. There'll be so much to talk about, but we're running out of time. Get your house in order.
100%. I recommend my viewers to your gold company, Miles Franklin. If you want to see their special pricing sheet, you can email info@milesfranklin.com and tell them that Capital Cosm sent me in the subject
Please
line.
do. Any questions that you've heard on this show, any questions that you have, the price list that we will send you at info@milesfranklin, much better than what we have listed on our website, will be as good or better than anywhere in America. And we will treat your listeners, I promise you, special. So info@milesfranklin, Capital Cosm sent you, and until we see each other next, Danny, I'll be looking forward to it. And thanks for having me on.
100%, 100%. So if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, comment down below. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of Andy's takes. Right? Go, Andy, go in the comments if you enjoyed this content. For more content like this, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.